And you started out by pointing out this is the week that I endorse Joe Biden. And I'm glad to do that. And it's partly because of policies. Joe Biden has said that he's in favor of canceling a chunk of student loan debt, that he wants to raise Social Security and disability payments, things that I really care a lot about, that he wants to put more restrictions and oversight on money that goes to Wall Street. But it's also about the kind of person you are and who you're fighting for.
Would Elizabeth Warren be a good choice for the Biden ticket? Recently, Mehdi Hassan made the case for it in an Intercept piece where he noted the strength of her planning, her popularity, and her progressive stances.
The Intercept's D.C. bureau chief and great friend of the show, Ryan Grim, is going to weigh in on that notion and how likely or unlikely it may be. Great to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you.
So start off with, because you do this so well, with the history of the Warren-Biden relationship to sort of set the context for this conversation.
Oh God, it's disorienting to be at this place when you consider their history. She is a bankruptcy professor. She and two of her colleagues embarked on a decades-long project, which is actually still ongoing. Some of her colleagues and then some new ones are still doing it, where they went to courthouses, went through bankruptcy records, and tried to answer the question: what is it that makes people go bankrupt in the United States of America? And one of the things that they concluded was that medical debt was a lead driver of bankruptcy. That was a shocking finding at the time, and has kind of fueled a lot of the policy conversations around that issue. Now, as bankruptcies were increasing throughout the early 1990s, Wall Street, and particularly Wilmington, Delaware, where the credit card industry was based, because they had no laws around usury or other exploitation of consumers, began demanding that bankruptcy rules be tightened to make it harder for people to file for it. Elizabeth Warren kind of got out of the academic world and entered the political world in the mid-1990s to be part of a commission that was studying how this should be done. That put her up against Joe Biden, who was known as the senator from MBNA. MBNA was the biggest card issuer at the time. It's now owned by Bank of America. From then over the next decade, she engaged in a knife fight with Joe Biden, testifying before his committee, working the Democratic and Republican senators, try to get them to oppose bankruptcy reform. She persuaded, at the end of the Clinton administration, Hillary Clinton to go to Bill Clinton and urge him to veto the bankruptcy reform bill that Biden had passed. Clinton did it and shocked everybody, because the end of the Clinton administration was a time of bank deregulation and other giveaways to Wall Street. They were stunned that he did this, and he did this at the behest of Hillary Clinton, who then, when she became a senator, supported bankruptcy reform. She was representing Wall Street by then, and Elizabeth Warren got in huge fights with Hillary Clinton over that and continued fighting Joe Biden. She has never been more vicious toward a Democratic senator than she has been towards Joe Biden during that time. He got an award from a national women's group, and she wrote a paper, not just a comment, but actually wrote an academic paper that said, that women should not, be celebrating Joe Biden in the evening and sold out by him in the morning. And really kind of refashioned the bankruptcy conversation as a women's issue, because so many women were the ones that were filing for bankruptcy, and then putting Biden on the other side of that. So here we are now, 15 years later. Biden won that bankruptcy fight, and she's in not only endorsing him for president, but is very seriously being considered as the man's running mate.
That is such a fascinating history that you lay out there, Ryan. So talk to us about that. She says she would serve as his vice president. I think she praised his progressive credentials. How serious are these discussions happening? And relative to the stakes that you see for the progressive movement, would this be the best outcome? What do you think?
Well, from what I've heard inside the Biden camp, that it's very serious. So the question that you have to ask as a progressive, I guess, is, of the possible options, who is the best, or who is the least bad? I wrote a piece with Jeremy Scahill before he said he was going to narrow it to a particular gender, that he should actually pick Bernie Sanders. And a recent poll showed that he would be the most popular choice among Democratic voters, and that would go the furthest to kind of bring the elements of the party together in November. But he has said that he's not going to choose a man, and so you're left with a list that includes Warren, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, potentially Cortez Masto out of Nevada. People put Stacey Abrams on that list, but my understanding is that she's not being taken very seriously by the Biden campaign. And so each of those women have strengths that they could bring to the ticket, and they have weaknesses. But if you go through each one of them, a dispassionate analysis might find that of those, Elizabeth Warren has the fewest weaknesses and the most number of strengths that she brings to the campaign. Kamala Harris doesn't bring much. She had a poor campaign. She doesn't have a lot of support among the Black community. Joe Biden already has a ton of support among Black voters, as he showed during the campaign. Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden's supposed to be the guy that's able to win these Midwestern middle class voters, and so it's not clear exactly what Klobuchar brings. Biden is a terrible manager of people. Klobuchar is an even worse manager of people. It could be the most dysfunctional White House since Buchanan. So then you come down to Warren. There are a lot of Bernie supporters who won't see that as an olive branch to them, but there are a huge portion of kind of progressive voters who would say, okay, that works. And then you also have the kind of indivisible moms who basically helped power Democrats to taking the House in 2018. These suburban women who are extraordinarily active in the amount of work that they're willing to put in for a campaign when they're fired up. Those are the people who flipped the nomination to Biden. So this would be saying, okay, of Warren's remaining supporters, you guys were most heavily represented there. So here's somebody that you can rally behind.
I mean, maybe, but aren't those the people who are most motivated just by the idea of defeating Donald Trump? And, it's not like Elizabeth Warren performed very well in this primary either. For all her, media coverage, like media really loved her and elevated her and all of that. She got third place in her home state ultimately, and her base seemed to be this very sort of narrow, mostly white, mostly more affluent, higher educated white people who, again, are exactly the folks who are like most enthused just about defeating Donald Trump. It really doesn't matter who you put on the ticket. And the other thing I threw out there, and this was a Nate Silver analysis a while back, based on the blue slant of the state of Massachusetts, because it's not like she's going to bring a swing state into play here. She actually has underperformed in her own state, given how blue it is. She's one of the least popular senators in the country among her own constituents. So just put aside whether she's a progressive and whether she'd change the shape of the administration, just electorally, frankly, I don't see what she adds.
No, that's a fair point. And then you get back to the question of what does anybody add, and that gets to somebody who I forgot to mention earlier, Gretchen Whitmer, who is the new governor of Michigan, who's been tangling with President Trump over the coronavirus response. But she has plenty of problems on her own. Would it look weird for a governor to be campaigning for vice president while people across her state are dying, which would kind of undercut her rationale, which that she is handling the situation quite well. Second, she comes from the kind of Blue Cross Blue Shield world. Her campaign was largely funded by Blue Cross. She beat a progressive in the primary to get where she is, and she's only been in office since January of 2019. But if you're just looking at pure electoral calculus and you're looking for somebody from Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, then she's kind of the only one that fits that, unless you go all the way down to like an Attorney General Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania or somebody like that. But he's already been eliminated. He's not a woman, which then maybe brings you back to Amy Klobuchar. Minnesota is only won by Democrats by a sliver. So maybe they say, you know what, let's just make sure we lock down Minnesota. We're not getting anything else from any of these vice presidential candidates. So at least let's pick this up.
Yeah. Last question for you, Ryan. Is there a recognition within the Biden campaign that whomever they pick to be vice president is kind of the leader of the Democratic Party after Joe Biden? Do they understand that from a trajectory perspective? Because I see this argument a lot from the progressive left. They're saying, we need to maybe it's time to just make amends. And if they can take Elizabeth Warren, at least that's something, because it's better than, say, like a Stacey Abrams or a Kamala Harris. How are the Biden campaign actually thinking about this?
I mean, so there's two ways that they think about that. One is that you understand that this certainly could be a Dick Cheney situation, where the president is so weak that an effective vice president, actually then runs the show, and so that cuts both ways for somebody like Elizabeth Warren. For the people who are her enemies in Biden's camp would say, don't bring somebody like her in because she's actually going to run it. People that she gets along well with, like Ted Kaufman is an interesting case. He's Biden's longtime chief of staff and close friend, who was appointed to take Biden's seat in 2009, 2010. Everybody expect him to kind of have the same voting record as Biden had throughout his career. Instead, he became this kind of firebrand radical who pushed to break up the big banks, nearly succeeded with an amendment, and otherwise kind of went to war with Wall Street and teamed up with Elizabeth Warren a lot. So somebody like that would say, well, okay, if Biden certainly isn't going to run for a second term and will barely be president for his first term, then having somebody like this in the vice president's seat actually is beneficial to what we're trying to do. So the answer is yes, that is something people think about, that not only does this person become the most likely to be the next Democratic nominee for president or the next president if Joe Biden dies, but they'll be in some ways kind of an acting president, which we've had in various forms throughout our history before.
Right.
That's such an interesting point. Ryan, thank you so much. Great to have you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, man.
Next on Rising, New York Times media columnist Ben Smith is going to tell us how Trump's direct line to the public during the coronavirus pandemic might impact the presidential campaign when Rising continues.